There's got to be a better way. Those are words many Americans think when they go to secure a loan, but ones Doug Lebda used to actually make a better way. The LendingTree CEO joins me now to discuss how he launched a business aimed at solving a common personal finance problem. Doug, welcome. Thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, so the idea for LendingTree came to you after your own personal frustration with trying to secure a loan for your own mortgage. So talk to me a little bit about why you believe this idea could be the key to kind of flipping this industry on its head.
So this actually came to me in 1994, and then I launched the business in 1996. And it was really thought, I did what most people do when they get a mortgage. In those days, you looked at a rate table in the newspaper, and then I applied for loans with different banks and felt like I was getting the runaround. I felt like rates were changing. It was a very disempowering process. It was very confusing. And I said, as you said, there has to be a better way.
Yeah.
It was a difficult business to get going, just like any marketplace business, because we not only need to get consumers, obviously we have to get lenders. Think of us like a kayak for loans, for everything from mortgages, home equity, auto loans, personal loans, and credit cards. So you have to solve simultaneously both sides of the equation. You have to get lenders who want to do business and are willing to pay you enough money that you can then afford to go market. And so you have to figure out consumer marketing, and you have to focus on your lender partners as well.
Like a perfect balancing act, right?
Exactly. You're always balancing supply and demand. That's
Yeah.
basically what we do every day.
Yeah. Well, you have a knack for timing because you took your company public right before the dot-com bubble burst, and you had that kind of dot-com name associated with you, except maybe in this case you had an actual business plan. So you helped it stay afloat through that whole process. You sold it to IAC, and then you came back to it right before the housing bubble burst.
I did.
So during that tumultuous time, you kept seeing these reports about how your company was next to fail. As a CEO and as a leader of that company, was there ever a time that you just wanted to kind of throw in the towel and say, maybe this isn't going to work? Did you ever want to give up?
Absolutely not. It was very interesting. One of the reasons I was able, I think, to be an entrepreneur is I started to focus not even so much just on the metrics of the business, but really saw everything as a challenge to overcome. So, for example, when we went public, we had to do that process very, very fast. And I'll never forget when I was 29 years old and I was sitting there with 20 lawyers around a table and saying there has to be actually a better way than sitting there handwriting an S1. And we were able to get public very quickly. So those challenges I've always really found interesting. And we had to survive the dot-com bust. Then we had to come back and we stayed focused on our numbers and did very, very well. And then after 2008, we had to go through significant restructuring. Thankfully, we had a lot of cash on the balance sheet when IAC spun us off. And we really just focused on motivating, getting all the employees, getting them all on exactly the same page, and making sure that everybody was really committed. So I really enjoy the challenges. And a lot of people who've worked for me say that I do my best work at the worst times.
So you're not a serial entrepreneur, but you did leave what seems to be a secure career path. With PwC, you were an auditor and consultant there. So aside from your own frustration as a motivating factor, how did you decide to take that leap into kind of a whole different career?
So it's interesting. I almost didn't do it, which kills me to this day when I think of just how close I was. I actually left business school at University of Virginia at the Darden School after my first year. During that year, I wrote the business plan for LendingTree, did some early testing, some early websites, and started to raise a little bit of money. And at the end of that year, believe it or not, I got turned down for the 2 jobs I was going to do for the summer.
Wow.
Actually, I got 1 job and was turned down for another one. And I basically said to myself, I'll give it a year. And with entrepreneurs, a lot of times people think of entrepreneurs as taking risks. Most entrepreneurs are actually not taking risks. You focus on what they like to call your affordable loss. Like, what are you going to be able to invest in this? And for me, once I said, you know what, I'll give it a year. That's my downside, is that I spend a year on this, and worst case, I have to go back and get a real job. And it worked. And so that's what made me really take the leap.
Well, speaking of lessons learned, I mean, you've led your company through countless lessons, I'm sure, learning periods. What has been the biggest challenge you've had to overcome, or I guess the biggest lesson that you've learned, you've taken away from all those challenges?
I think, first off, you have to have people that I said believe in the mission, the vision, and the core principles. That's number one. The second thing, I think, is to really understand your customers and to think of customers as people, not just think of them as sort of graphs on a spreadsheet or doing market analysis. So on the consumer side, we spend a lot of time listening to calls, for example, and I still listen to calls in our call center. And when you get to that real understanding of just what the consumer's feeling at the time they're doing it, then it's very easy to design a product and a customer experience that meets them where they are.
You're clearly very passionate about this industry and what you do. Where did that come from? Was there somebody, an entrepreneur in your life that maybe you looked up to, or where do you draw inspiration?
So some of it was from my father. My dad was in sales, and he made me sell. It didn't make me sell, but he gave me a job selling at a very early age. Literally cold calling in the white pages.
Wow.
And what that taught me, though, was first off that sales, which most people think of as something they don't want to do or they don't want to face rejection.
Right.
For me, it really became about a solution. It became about being very honest and saying, we've got this potential solution. Let's talk about how we can make it work for you. And one thing I learned, for example, is that a fast no is better than a sort of a slow maybe.
Yeah.
And it's actually okay if it's not a fit with a certain client of ours. That's just perfectly fine. And the other thing I think is to always be very, very candid, open, and honest with everybody.
You have such a fascinating story. Doug, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.